How's it going? You probably read that sentence on that first card and thought I'm out of my mind. Of course. A tree falls in the forest, it's going to make a sound. Of course it will. But I will say, and I will stand by what I say on the card. No, it does not. It only makes a sound if the system is complete, the sound system is completed, and then there is someone or something with an ear to hear it. If it's not a sound. You have to have the system. You have to have the sound creation and then the sound reception for the sound to exist. So I posit that no. If a tree falls in the forest, there's no one or anything to hear it. No sound. Just compressions and rarefactions of air. And what is that? Let's get into that here in a minute because what I'd like to do is sort of explain to you a little bit about the Haas Media Studio and the sound system that we have in that space because there's a system we have, of course, that leads from the creation of a sound to the hearing of the sound. And I want to make sure that you understand the process that's available in the studio. But before we do that, it's kind of worth looking at a brief description and history of sound systems in general, because the system of creating and transmitting, storing, replaying, and amplifying human or audio, any kind of audio, has made some serious changes since the dawn of humankind, and they're worthy of review, I think. So some of these systems may even seem familiar to you. So I'm just going to go and give you a brief history of sound systems. The original sound system, okay, you have a tree and it falls, or an animal cries. There's compressions, rarefactions of springy air molecules that travel spherically from the source. That's the nature of what sound waves are. Again, they're just basically the compressions and rarefactions of springy air molecules. That's sound. And the more that they compress and rarefy, the louder the sound is. A sound that creates a sound wave that is created in nature, if it's a very loud one, will have extreme compressions and extreme rarefactions. This group of compressions and rarefactions of springy air enters the ear canal of a creature or a human being and strikes the tympanum or the eardrum. This then hits the ossicles, which are a series of bones you would see over here. Here's the tympanum, and here's some bones right there next to them. There's three little bones, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And what this does is this transfers this low impedance energy of this compressions and rarefactions of air molecules and turns that into a high impedance frequency. And it hits the cochlea at the oval window. And the cochlea is a marvelous thing here. This is where the actual transduction of sound happens in the human head. This is where acoustic waveforms are turned into electrical impulses that go to the brain. And it's pretty cool. We can spend a good amount of time talking about the cochlea, which is a very awesome small organ that it makes the whole hearing process possible. Then this sends the information to the superior olivary nucleus, pairs the info from the two ears, and makes it possible for the brain to localize information. Now we can sort of hear where it's coming from because we have two ears. Now we can triangulate and figure out where's it coming from. And now we can understand, is this sound a threat? Is it food? What is it? And where is it coming from? So this is the essential system when it comes to the basic animal and the basic original human system, is that it's just very quite simply compressions and rarefactions of molecules created, hitting the ear canal, being transmuted into electrical signals, and then entering the brain to be figured out by the brain. That is the original system. So with that system, of course, there's no chance for any storage. It's just, the sound happens, the ear hears it. The only thing that's for storage is the memory of having heard it. How can we now store sound and then recreate sound? So that for many years we just wrote it down. So the next system that we have is our first storage. That starts with somebody comes up with a sound idea, composes a play or a musical piece, whatever. He writes it down or teaches it to somebody else. Somebody then performs this play or piece or whatever it is. Somebody hears that performance, and then it all goes to the ears and all that stuff we were talking about. The ears goes to the cochlea, becomes electrical impulses that go to a brain again. So that is the original system of the first storage, was just writing down the music and performing the music. That worked quite well for a long time as far as musical storage was concerned, as long as we had people willing to write it down, willing to perform it, and willing to hear it. You have the first phonograph. Works kind of like this. Somebody makes a sound. Again, the making of the sound happens, or maybe there's a thunderclap in nature, or there's a bird call, or there's whatever. Something happens with sound. We have this funnel that we can gather the sound into. That causes that sound to go just like into an ear canal. It strikes a diaphragm just like the tympanum or the eardrum. There's a stylus on the end of that that then inscribes and etches the waveform onto a rotating cylinder of pliable material. What we can do is then reverse that process, put that stylus into the groove that we've created, and then that plays back, and the horn then amplifies that. We can hear it, then that goes into our ear canals and goes through our process of becoming brain food. So now we have the option of storage. We can now save the sound and play it back later. Storage and playback. Up until now, we just had human memory, and human memory doesn't always work very well, as we all know. This is how they used to have to record back in the day before we had electricity. People had to gather around these big funnels. Those funnels now ended up going all the way. Here's one end of the funnel where the band is, and the other end of that funnel is over here where the dude is with the disc cutter, and that sound is going through this hose, if you will, and hitting a diaphragm and a stylus, and that is then imprinting the sound onto the disc. So that was how it had to be done for many, many years. This is a fully mechanized process that we have with the phonograph. There is no electricity involved. So we have the invention of electricity and the microphone, which came from, of course, the telephone. And this allows us to make our first really serious sound system. So here's our system with the microphone and speaker. We have a sound source, and we have the microphone. And the microphone acts very much like the human ear. It has a diaphragm that the sound hits the diaphragm. There is a system within that then excites electricity in such a way that creates the waveform and can be recreated in the system later. The microphone allows us to capture acoustic sounds, turn them into electrical sounds. And we have a cord here then we can then put that sound through, send it to an amplifier, and then use that amplifier to really get that onto the disc very nicely and to have a very, very clear, clean, and precise sound. So now we could do disc cutting, and it sounded really good. It sounded much, much better than just going straight to it from the funnel. All right, then we have the discs that we put the sound upon, and the disc players that we played upon, and then that had an amplifier, because if we just played that up from that, really couldn't hear it very well. So instead of those big horns that we had from phonographs, all of a sudden we had amplifiers and loudspeakers. Yes, so now we could bring that sound source that we had started with up here and bring it up to as loud as we wanted to make it. So we can then hear it in our ear systems, and we can then go through this whole process again in our ears. That's the system that we have at this point going up until the 40s. This guy Jack Mullins, who is kind of into recording, he fought in World War II, and he noticed while he was overseas in Germany and listening to the radio, and it was amazing. The orchestras were playing in the middle of the night. There was like 2 or 3 in the morning. Orchestras, full blast, sounding good. He's going, that can't be happening. They must be recording these orchestras, and it sounds fantastic. How the heck are they doing that? Because that's not live. That's not a disc. So what are they doing? He found some of these machines when they were going through the rubble later, and he managed to send them back to himself in America. And he's one of the guys that started the analog tape business by reverse engineering that. That's a whole story for another day. So analog tape, though, what does this allow us to do? This is pretty big deal, because now we're not just having to make one take at a time. We had previously with the disc cutting, situation, a performance had to be complete. You couldn't stop in the middle of it. You couldn't make any editing to it. You had to simply record exactly what was happening at the time. But now analog tape allowed us to record and edit the recordings and cut it up and splice it together. We could stop in the middle of it and pick up where we left off. We could start punching in other words, putting it in record as we're going. So this is a whole another major part of our system, and it allows us to have much more flexibility. Again, our sound source, going to our microphone, going to our cabling, going to, this time, a machine that has tape on it. And one track, then we had stereo, then we had 4 tracks, 8 tracks, 16, 24, 32, and on and up. This could then be sent to a disc cutter to make a disc master, and then we could have both vinyl discs and cassettes. Actually, there was also now tape technology that we could have to listen to at home, as well as reel to reel. We had players that could play that, amplifiers that amplified it to the loudspeaker going to the ear. So that's our system, really up until the invention of digital. This was a perfectly good system. But then, of course, digital comes along, and this somewhat changes our system. Let's look into and see how this could happen here. Again, starts with the sound source, goes to the microphone, goes to the cabling. This is all the same as before. And we can also still go through a mixer. We can mix and we can have it going to our analog tape still. But, I mean, instead of just cutting discs for vinyl, we could also master it to this video cassette machine called a PCM 1630, a Sony PCM 1630. And we could put our analog information in digital mode on video cassette, which then we could make glass masters for CDs. And now we had CDs, vinyl, and cassettes. We had the players to play them. And then on this side is still the same deal. Amplify that into a loudspeaker, goes to the ears, to your brain. So that's our system for a while. We had just in the beginning, and of course we end up getting digital tape machines. So this analog tape machine can be replaced by that. This system works pretty well for a long time, but now, of course, we have a new system that comes right after that, and that is the digital audio workstation. Now changes how we do this whole system. Now our system is thus. We start with our sound source again. It is recorded by a microphone. Still doing that. Still got a cable. Still using mixers. Still using amplifiers. But now we go into a computer and we go through an analog to digital converter that gets us into the digital world, and we do our work in the digital world with our digital audio workstation. Then we can then go from that and make, again, we can still make a vinyl master. We can still make our CD master, still with the 1630. But now we have our digital master makers, which is the DDP. And a DDP is a file that holds all the information of your final mix and does it in such a way that can be reproduced in the various formats. But now that is our new mastering format for most of our digital stuff that's never going to become part of a physical product. And we have CDs, we have vinyl, but now we have non-physical product. We have sound files, wave files, we have music files, iTunes, Spotify. We still have our CD player, we still have our vinyl disc player, but now we have our computers, and our computer players, we still have to amplify that. But now we have better headphones and earbuds. People are not listening to speakers quite as much, except in their cars. And that's still going to the brain, to the ear. We still have another step we've gone since then. Let's look at how much further the system has gone and is going real quick. This is the next step in the system. So, okay, this is our system. We have VSTs, we have instruments, virtual sound technologies, instruments that exist as virtual sounds that can be accessed through MIDI, musical instrument digital interface. So we can have pianos, drums, basses, guitars, everything of that already in sounds, so we don't even use a microphone. We can even have vocal samples. They're already made. Those were probably made with a microphone, but you don't have to use a microphone. You can just get the samples. So we've eliminated the microphone aspect, And we just have digital sound that we can access all the time and never have to record anything with a microphone to create a lot of things that we want to listen to now. That goes straight to a DAW, again, a DAW. And a lot of times now, we just go to a DDP creator for our mastering because we're really starting to see that we don't want to make CDs anymore. CDs are getting smaller. We're listening to files, Spotify. We're listening to them on our phones and our computers now. We're not listening to our CD players. We're listening to them amplified through speakers sometimes, but more often than not through self-amplified Bluetooth devices that pick it up from the computer. And we're listening to our music more often than not on headphones and earbuds. And if not that, we're listening in our cars or in surround. And some of us have 5.1 systems that we're listening to. So now we have three-dimensional listening. And that now goes to the ear and processes to the brain, thusly again. So you can see our system has developed quite a bit over time. What does that mean for us? Well, we have a lot of this last element at our disposal, and so do you. Let's talk about what you have in our system at the studio. Our system starts with microphones. Yes, we have 4 different kinds. And again, a microphone does transduction through induction and capacitance. These microphones have different qualities, different needs. We'll learn more about those. But that's where it begins. We have cabling, which are XLR3 connectors. So they're 3 pins, balanced lines, shielded twisted pairs with the screening braid. This keeps interference to a minimum and also spreads the interference, whatever interference does come in, evenly across all the cabling within. There's one-to-one transformers on each end. We'll explain a little bit more about how cabling works later with common mode rejection. Anyways, we have wall jack XLR inputs. We shield the twisted pairs, take us to the patch bay. We have fully normaled tiny telephone jack cables, very small jacks on those so that we can connect in the patch bay to do some switchboard type connecting there from systems that we need to do. We don't have to do that a lot in our studio, but sometimes we do. Then that's connected by Cat5 cable to the Avid Matrix, which is our primary sort of, that's where the fun happens with Pro Tools. This is where our preamps and our processing for the Pro Tools happens with the Matrix. That is operated by the Dadman GUI, or graphic user interface, that you will see on the screen in the 174. And that will control the Matrix through Dante and Maddie, and that is connected to the iMac Pro. The iMac Pro is running Pro Tools Ultimate. The iMac Pro also, using Yukon, activates the Avid S6 mixing surface. It is important to note that the Avid S6 mixing surface does not pass any audio. It simply controls, like a large mouse, the Matrix and the Mac Pro. Monitoring. The Avid Matrix kicks out digital information to the Andiamo converter, which turns that into analog information, sends it to the XP8080 DSP processor, which does a little bit of processing, a little bit of EQing for the room in our studio, and that then goes to the speakers in the studio, Genelecs and the Focals. We have the 8.1 and this pair of Focals, and that level and speaker choice is controlled at the Avid S6, but that's happening at the Matrix. Our headphone, basic cue system. The Avid S6 is also sending to the Ashley amplifier, and there's a little XLR twisted shielded pair going to the wall jack that goes to the red transformer boxes to the headphones for our all-purpose little red boxes. We can use those just to get a stereo mix of whatever is on the computer to anybody on the floor. But the Avioms are what we like to use the most, and that's a primary Dante switch coming out of the Matrix going to that Aviom personal headphone mixer system via Cat5 Ethernet. So that's how we get from microphone to us hearing it and going into our ears and into our brains and all that good stuff. That's the system that we have available for us. But there's also storage, and that storage is the studio drive. It's your personal external drive, which you should be working from at all times if possible. The studio drive is wiped down when shutdown script is used. The user drive will hold your stuff for a while, but it is purged periodically, so you can't rely on that. Please don't do that, but there's a pretty good chance if you have it on there for a while, it'll still be there. Be smart, keep it on your drive, and that's always the best way to do it. So that sort of gets you through our basic systems from history all the way up until the present time here at the Haas Media Studio. And I hope that gives you some fundamental things to think about as we start moving forward and looking at these different elements in our systems that we are going to be studying in order to understand how to do audio properly, make better sounding records, and get the full use out of the Haas Media Studio. All right, see you down the road soon. Take care.